Let's take things one step at a time in E1M8 Ziggurat Vertigo. Much like many secret levels, it has a central gimmick, this being very low gravity. You can tell American McGee wanted to take advantage of physics since the level has so many ogres with high-riding grenades in it. At least McGee gives you a rocket launcher over a grenade launcher. I prefer having a straight shooting weapon. In addition, there's also a couple of invulnerabilities which are crucial in those harder difficulties because Shambler. As is, the jumping can get fairly tricky and there isn't all that much to the level either. While that doesn't make the level terrible by any means, it does mean I won't enjoy it nearly as much. Maybe I'm just not as big of a fan of these central gimmick flash-in-the-pan secret levels. I prefer a solid core. It's time to ring the bell with our sales pitch as we approach E1M6, the door to Chton. The first apparent thing about this level is it's very much a straight line. There's very little deviation outside of hunting for secrets. Mind you, it has some interesting ideas like a moving wall of spikes you have to kill some ogres to escape. A couple of shamblers even appear to give a bit of challenge, though their appearance is thankfully kept scarce for now. The level also feels a bit on the cramped side, certainly nothing like Doom's computer station, which felt sprawling. For being the last non-boss level of the episode, I just expected a bit more. To its credit, it has a bit of density with enemies like ogres, fiends, and zombies, just lacking for true depth. It's time to miraculously survive digestion in Shub's pit. Now that they have access to fully 3D polygons, you'd think they could do something really cool with the boss here, but instead we get something more inactive than the Icon of Sin. Yep, she manages to do less than a literal face painted on a wall with Romero's head behind it. Shub doesn't even spawn enemies, they just teleport inscriptedly. Shamblers and Vors pretty much litter the path leading to the final teleporter. The one thing of note is that it's the one mandatory use of telefragging since you teleport to the spiked ball and you use that to go inside her to win, and that's kinda cool, but it's still very disappointing. I get that the game had a troubled development, but even having her tentacles lash out to throw projectiles would have gone a long way. Let's be a rude house guest as we enter E1M7, the House of Chton. Quake definitely had a shaky development because this is the only real boss in the entire game, to the point that even expansions and mods reuse it as a boss. However, it's a fairly short fight if you know what you're doing, even on hard. I can see how it might take a little bit at first, spoiler warning, to realize you can't directly fight it and have to press buttons to electrocute it. However, I have to judge it from a replay, so it's not long at all. It's kinda funny that the level claims to have 21 enemies, but they're all pretty much there for a scripted sequence at the end of it. Mods would go on to have more direct combat with Chitons, which is arguably far more interesting. As is, it's an interesting boss for its time, but there's just not enough to the level otherwise. It's time to respect your elders in E4M3, the Elder God Shrine. You can tell this is a shrine to evil because it introduces spawns, the bane of my existence. They may not seem like much when they're just flailing at you, but they blow up when you kill them and they are hard to get a safe distance from. There's not that much to say about the rest of the level other than running past zombies to get a grenade launcher. Well, that and a trap floor that slides out to reveal lava that you either have to jump or take advantage of it resetting to clear. Sure, the winged sword stained glass is cool, but it's just repeated over and over and the graveyard barely has enough in it to be of note. When the most noteworthy thing about you is introducing the most annoying enemy in the game, that's not all that good. It's time to shed some pounds in E2M3, the Crypt of Decay. This is definitely not one of my favorites, starting of course with linearity. While you do have a mode to play around with, the meat of the level is cramped straight lines. Moreover, as I've mentioned before, I'm fine with challenge but not sucker punches. Having an entire hallway full of nail shooters steers heavily towards the ladder and the exit even has 2 shamblers on you. If you're pistol starting, you straight up have zombies you have to run past until you can get the grenade launcher later on. Obviously the level wasn't insurmountably hard and I managed to get through it, but it left a sour taste all the same. A few branching paths other than a dead end to a locked door would have gone a long way. It may have a few boosters like 100 health and quad damage and secrets, but that's just not gonna cut it for me. I'll be back in E3M1 Termination Central. Aesthetically, it resembles the installation in the Slipgate Complex, but that only serves to make it disappointing. It may have enforcers, grunts, and Rottweilers, but it's easily the weakest of the 3 and doesn't offer anything they don't. It manages to feel even more cramped than a lot of previous levels due to the moats now being acid pools to discourage you from even hopping into those. My best guess is these first levels were made to be similar to each other like they're all Slipgate hubs, but that doesn't excuse the sheer lack of variety in my opinion. You may get your choice of episodes in any order you want, but they still could have made things more interesting the higher up you go. It's cramped halls with few weapon and enemy variety. I'm not sure what else you could expect me to say here. You probably haven't heard of this one because it's E2M7, the Underearth. I know I sound like a broken record, but I really am not a fan of linear straight line levels, and rarely does it seem like Quake bothers straying from that. Even beyond that, the level is just honestly kind of paint by numbers, the only thing sticking out being an admittedly cool 360-degree nail shooter contraption. Fiends, ogres, death knights, and wizards are all around as you might expect, but at least there's no shamblers for this one. While there's a slight branching path, it's like Crypt of Decay in that it leads to a locked door until you go the intended path. There's also allegedly a way to skip a large chunk of the level, but it's a trick jump and I personally can never do it. Ultimately, it's just a pretty forgettable level that doesn't have that much going for it in my opinion. It's time to kick off Quake with a trip through dimensional planes in E1M1, the Slipgate Complex. As the level to kickstart the polygonal age, at least for id Software, you expect it to show off this fact. It's a bit of a more subtle introduction than Doom's E1M1, mainly showing off polygons for a support structure. That is, until you head down a nearby lift and suddenly have things like a small bridge and a multi-layered skybox. Should you choose, you can even hop into the moat nearby and experience the joys of swimming. Of course, if you hop into the pool of acid later on in the level without a protection suit, you'll also experience the dark side of swimming. Unlike Dick 3D's toxic pools, this damages you above and below the surface. If you're inquisitive, you also get an opportunity to test out Quake's nail gun in addition to the tried and true super shotgun. Also quad damage. We can feed worms in the Crypt of Decay next time, but it's time to swap grenades in E2M2, the Ogre Citadel. It certainly comes at you hard, especially if you're just doing this from a pistol start, which I did initially. I straight up had to weave around enemies and even rely on infighting while scrounging for ammo. I'm really glad I stopped pistol starting. I have to be honest though, the level's a bit too linear for my tastes. It may have a castle design, but Castle of the Damned, this is not. That's not to say it doesn't have some interesting things though, like a trap bridge that lowers and raises to practically force you to fight on it. It also has some nice mode areas, but you better hope you brought an explosive weapon because your only way of getting rid of the zombies here is in a secret. With a bit more ammo and openness, it would probably go much more favorably for me. Get your safecracker equipment as we probe E3M2, the Vaults of Zin. Well, it's the level that introduces the Ring of Shadows for invisibility and a reference to Lord of the Shadows, so that's kinda neat. Other than that though, it's business as usual for the most part. The beginning forces you to run past zombies to get a grenade launcher, but frankly, that's more annoying than anything else. Given the entire level is basically just going from one switch to another to open doors or lifts, you can expect it to get repetitive fairly fast. Honestly, at this point, all I can say is it's like most Quake levels. Minus the few exceptions, it seems this is the norm for the level design, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. I suppose that does mean that this level is relatively a non-offender compared to most, but that just means it doesn't stand out either. Get ready to fear the sky because it's time for E4M7 Azure Agony. This level actually achieved a miracle and has two areas where you have more than one path for getting through an area. Okay, granted, there's short side paths, and one is kind of necessary because of secret rising stairs, but I'll take the victories where I can. Like the last episode, this one really doesn't have anything that can vaguely be called new for the episode ender, just Vors, Shamblers, and Spawns. That's not to say it's a bad level, just that it kind of fails to be a compelling finale to the episode. It's not like they're all that strategically placed either, it's more or less just running the gauntlet here. The single most unique thing about this level is fighting zombies underwater, and I think that says it all, really. It's time for discount carnival attractions in E3M7, the Haunted Halls. Your main prize for finding this secret level is the reintroduction of Vors, which is no doubt praiseworthy news for masochists everywhere. Well, at least it has alternating nail shooters, which is also kinda neat. I guess at least one nice thing I can say about this level is it doesn't have an annoying gimmick to center around, making it better than far too many other secret levels. Really though, it falls into the category of secret level that feels like it could be any Quake level, really. Sorry if it sounds like I'm repeating myself over and over in these shorts, but honestly, I feel like these levels are mostly repeats of each other. There are slight things like hopping into a small opening to press a switch and hit another switch to teleport out, but nothing you haven't seen before, really. It's time to confuse people's voices for gusts in E3M5, the wind tunnels. The gimmick of the level is, of course, swimming. Well, and also being flung around the pipes like you're friggin' Mario.
Let's go.
To be honest, taking mandatory albeit minor fall damage actually kind of irks me a bit. The rest of the level is passable, it doesn't feel cramped, but it doesn't feel especially sprawling either, save for a few key areas that are a bit bigger. Two Shamblers serve as the main threat, but the combat loop is honestly becoming expected by this point. Thankfully, most of the level is spared points of no return, but once you get past the starter area, anything you missed in there is just lost. At least the swimming breaks things up, and engaging with fiends is always engagingly engaging. It's time to get a splitting headache in more ways than one in E4M6, the Pain Maze. You know, for all the criticisms I could give it, I'll admit the level was a fair bit of fun blasting through. The quad damage at the beginning really encourages you to blitz it before it runs out, and I feel really proud of myself for getting through the altar in 3 fours with it. It's mostly a simple level with elements you've mostly seen before, but it adds wrinkles like a room full of spawns you're suddenly shoved into. There's also a section of wood that makes pretty good use of Quake's 3D polygons, and it's honestly a shame that more Quake levels didn't do things like that to make it stand out more. I actually find it amusing that the level gives you environment suits when you can easily make it through any water passage without taking any damage. Grab your pickaxe as we explore E2M4, the Ebon Fortress. I've decided I'm no longer going to mention if a level is linear since the vast majority are, so you can safely assume it is unless I say otherwise. Instead, I'm going to point out that at least this level is somewhat spacious in spite of that. Having halls that aren't entirely cramped really helps, and there's a neat ride through an acid pool. It's also the level in this episode you get a rocket launcher, handy if you don't want your booms to bounce. It won't do you much good against the 2 Shamblers here, but at least there are other weapons you can use in its stead. The level is also decently enough designed on an aesthetic level, at least in Quake's usual muted color castle kind of way, and it avoids anything truly annoying. It's time to abandon all hopes of subtlety in E4M5, Hell's Atrium. It seems to be a follow-up on the Elder God's Shrine, now full-on spamming the spawns the devil called, just spawns. Also, I'm just plain not a fan of the secret exit being sealed by unlocking the path to the regular exit. It's a secret exit, so it's not a deal breaker, but none of the levels in any of the Dooms to my knowledge make the secret level permanently inaccessible, especially by going down the regular path. I feel like you could have did the challenging jumping across poles aspect without making it easy to miss out on, but maybe I'm just being salty. The rest of the level is as you would expect, no Shamblers but a healthy amount of zombies, fiends, vors, and as I said, spawns. I've got good news for the M's of SNM because this is E3M6, Chambers of Torment. The final level of Episode 2 introduced Vors, so naturally this one ups the ante and introduces more of them. Yep, this one has absolutely nothing in it that can arguably be said to be bosses, at least new ones. Now, just so I'm not too overly critical here, I will say the level looks aesthetically nice and it gives you some breathing room. The gritty metal lava castle probably stands as the best use for Quake's color scheme that tends to be very limited compared to Doom's. The metal grating on lava is especially nice with the way it contrasts the color and brightness. Still, beyond looking nice, it's a pretty level. I actually gave myself false hope in the beginning of branching paths, but nope, it just gets you out of the lava. It's time to go raiding in E3M3, the Tomb of Terror. It's got nail shooters located in the ground and stairs that rise out of the lava. It does have 2 switches you have to press under spiked crusher ceilings, which is pretty neat, but memorable moments aren't too plentiful here. With the exception of a few larger lava rooms, the level is on the smaller and relatively cramped side. I feel I should mention that I still have fun with most of these levels because Quake is fun, but this isn't really a review of the game as a whole. I will admit that the gritty metals of Quake do contrast pretty well with the lava here. I don't really bring up aesthetic very often with these levels, but credit where credit is due, this works to Quake's strength. Other than that, it's definitely a Quake level alright doing its Quakey things. It's time to see the Flying Dutchman's favorite study room in E4M2, the Tower of Despair. Yep, this is the last episode and they really want you to know about it because they're already piling on the Vors. While the previous episode did have some in a secret level, it seems they've now settled into their Baron role of just now randomly appearing throughout regular levels. Fortunately, they're not too big of a threat with a nail gun, or maybe I'm just getting used to them. Even the Shambler doesn't feel all that difficult anymore. It's kind of funny how that works with skill progression and all that. My biggest criticism of the level is that they flat out spoiled the stained glass being related to a secret at the beginning. Guess they're actually taking pity on shotgun starters. At least it had some unique trickery, like a water service you fall straight through. It's time to fall down into E2M6, the Dismal Oubliette. Well, it introduces 2 Vors, so you might say they count as the boss the way the Barons and Phobos Anomaly do. I guess I can see a case for that, even if it's not as much of a proper boss as the two main bosses from Doom and are more like revenants on heat-seeking steroids. The rest of the level is exactly what you would expect, straightforward in the most literal way possible. Sure, it has a changing bridge, but that's not contributing to much other than making previous areas incapable of going back to. Then there's the slow, lowering elevator of death, where you face shamblers, fiends, and zombies alike before the Vors are introduced. I'll give it credit for length being somewhat longer than other levels. At the very least, you can do much worse as far as Quake maps are concerned. It's time to get morbidly curious by E3M4, Satan's Dark Delight. If you like waiting as you ride flying platforms, then do I have the level for you? Okay, to the level's credit, the loops aren't that long, and the main one does have two of them in case you just missed one, so at least you don't have to wait the full length for it. There's also that need to unlock the rest of the bridge gimmick, but at least this one doesn't have points of no return, and really most of the level has a way to loop back around. The secret exit doesn't though, so hopefully you didn't save after jumping into it. It's marred a little though, since at one point in the aggressively move forward in one line level, you take a bit of mandatory fall damage. Still, it's a pretty good level with some decently spacious areas for all your shooting and blowing stuff up pleasure. It's time to go where love and joy come to die in E4M4, the Palace of Hate. I know I said shamblers don't feel so difficult anymore, but that's no invitation to spam them. Chill out, my dude. Well, at least they compensate by giving you the super nail gun, as well as a healing pool, which amusingly just gives you 25 health medkits until you've, quote, drained the healing pool of all its power. Beyond seemingly basing its difficulty off of Zerg rushing you with difficult enemies, I must say the level makes fairly good use of verticality. It also has a decent amount of variety, like jumping over moving planks atop a pond of angry rotfish. It's even a rare example of a non-episode 1 level I actually remembered going back into it for these rankings, and mostly fondly. It's time for the bustling rotten city life in E1M3, the Necropolis. The level certainly starts out strong by handing you a grenade launcher a la the Ogres. Don't go too ham with it though, because as the name suggests, it also introduces zombies. They'll always rise again unless they're gibleted, making that grenade launcher a necessity. It also introduces the Wizard, kind of a weird name since I see them as more like ghosts. Basically, they're the flying ones that spit at you, so cacodemons. The level itself is fine and you actually get a branching path at the beginning. You'll end up that way either way due to requiring a key, but it's nice to have options. The last rung of the level is perhaps the weakest, but at least there's an interesting Crusher ceiling fake out. If you're playing on Harder Nightmare, it even introduces the lightning spamming shamblers. Hooray! Lock your car doors before we enter E1M4, the Grisly Grotto. It seems Quake has mostly settled into itself at the moment because the most it introduces is the super nail gun, which is basically just the nail gun but it hits harder. That isn't to say it isn't a very solid level though, it makes very good use of verticality and is half flooded like Duke 3D's Flood Zone. While it's not exactly up to the level that is, it still helps in making the level feel bigger and less constrained than it actually is. It's even where you find the secret level exit of the level, and it's not that hard if you actually take the time to look around. However, while I did enjoy it overall, it's just a bit too linear and lacking in new elements to place it at the top. Get ready to abandon all faith as we step into E1M2, Castle of the Damned. As a sequel to the starter level, I think it succeeds in just about every possible way. It has a more interesting castle design, introduces the Chainsaw Ogre Knight and Fiend, and shows off some scripted events. From the very beginning of the level, the chainsaw grenade launcher wielding ogre who's a threat from any range makes his debut. The other two are variations of melee, but it adds some extra flavor to things. The level also adds the idea of environmental hazards in the form of walls firing nails in a tight pattern. Add to that a couple of dynamic moments like a drawbridge pulling out and blocks popping into place and you've got a compelling level. It's time to feel bad vibes, man, in E1M5 Gloom Keep. Despite the name, this level has actually mostly left me feeling good about it. It's the first one to feel like a sequel to Castle of the Damned, and not just because it looks like a castle. It has a nice sense of scale and enough pathways to feel a little more free than most of the previous maps. If you're playing on easy or medium, the Shambler has now officially entered the chat. At least there are corners to shield from its relentless lightning and appears close enough to bait it into melee swings. The level also takes the concept I gush about in Doom with get keys in any order for exit, although this only has 2 keys. Thankfully, what looks like a point of no return in the exit is subverted by opening a secret and teleporting out. Frankly, the level has pleasantly surprised me despite introducing on easy and medium an enemy I'm not a fan of. It's time to get the latest driver that will cause instabilities in E2M1, the installation. Honestly, this is the kind of sense of scale I wish was in more Quake levels. There's a central moated area that very much reminds me of Doom's E1M1 hangar, only more expansive with 3D floors and swimming. While that doesn't mean the level is completely open-ended, it does help give it a sense of exploration. Naturally, the level's secrets very much reward you for looking around. The level also initially makes you believe it'll be the same enemy roster as Episode 1, but quickly introduces the Enforcer. They may have dodgeable projectiles, but they compensate by hitting you that much harder. While you can't use the cells they drop yet, it gives a nice sense of intrigue. It's time to get very dirty thoughts in E4M1, the Sewage System. Kind of ironic that the level named after crap processing is the least crappy of the starter levels. And by that I mean it's actually really good. It has a similar feeling of scope as the installation, but it actually feels less linear. While there's still a straight path as you would expect, there's actually more paths around, so it feels a bit more like a Doom level. The enemy roster is as you would expect, just enforces and grunts, and also in my opinion takes much better advantage of 3D polygons than most other Quake maps with layers and 3D decor like hanging lights. On the subject of hanging lights, it also has the most memorable secret where you have to hop on one like your Mario, and that's just delightful. It's time to wrap up my feelings on Quake's maps as a whole. I feel I should preface this by saying that I think Quake is very fun in terms of its mechanics and the potential of its Slipgate dimensions. The better of its levels can really show off its polygonal prowess over Doom at the time, and even in most of the weaker levels I still enjoyed myself. The only problem is I'm ranking these on the merits of the levels themselves, and I feel most of them fall short. I get that polygons were hard on computers at the time, but they could have found ways to make a lot of the levels feel less cramped and linear. The more spacious of Doom's levels had rooms or even entire sections of the map that were optional to reward exploration, and I feel Quake just didn't have enough in that department. Combined with having arguably only one genuine boss, the troubled development really shows. Well, at least there's always mods.